Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com, and in this tutorial we're going to be talking about JavaScript ES6 Promises. So basically, promises are used to avoid callback hell. Now, have you ever worked with a bunch of asynchronous functions that depend on each other? Let's say I have three asynchronous functions. Let's say function A has to finish first, and then function B executes, and then function C executes. Now, if you have all three of those asynchronous functions within each other, it starts to get really messy. And a way to prevent that is by using promises. So now I can do something like this. So I can say const, and we're going to form a sentence. And you would use promises with asynchronous task. You could use it with synchronous tasks, but it really doesn't make any sense. So if I say const sentence, and we're just going to say sentence A. So I need to wait for sentence A to load. So now sentence A is just going to be a function. And now I'm going to return a promise. So I'm just going to say new promise. And then within here, promise accepts a function. And it has two arguments. It has resolve and it has reject. And then within here, you would usually have your asynchronous call. Okay, so let's talk about resolve and reject. Resolve is the data that asynchronous call gets back from the server. So if I'm working with an external API, if everything goes to plan and you get the data back from the server, you would call resolve. Now, if I call that server, that API, and let's say they give me an error, you would use reject. So I'm just going to call resolve. I'm just going to say resolve. And I'm going to say, hey, what's up, guys? Okay, so now we have our first promise call. So let's actually try to use this. So if I was to say sentence A, now I am invoking the function. But if you take a look here, what is this function doing? It's returning a promise. So that in and of itself does not do anything. What I have to do is then call the then method. So if I say then, and now this obviously takes a function. And now then is going to have whatever we resolve. Now this would usually be the data, but for now we have a sentence. And then here we can say sentence from A. And then let's actually console.log this. Sentence from A. And now if I save this, head over to Chrome, hit refresh, you can see that our sentence gets resolved. So now let's actually try to chain promises together. And this is where it solves the callback hell problem we get with asynchronous calls. So let's say I want a bunch of sentences. I have sentence A, and we want to combine sentence A to sentence B and then to sentence C. Well, what I can do is, let's actually copy this. And I'm just going to call this sentence B. And then in sentence B, I can say, hey, what's up, guys? And I can say, it's Pedro here from, and that's sentence B. And now let's make sentence C. So if I copy this, paste this here, and I can say sentence C from noobcoder.com. Alright, so now I have all my asynchronous calls here. So now how do I avoid sticking it in within here? Well, what I can do is actually just get rid of this. Actually, let's keep that. And I can say something like this. I could say return sentence B, call it, right? Now, once I execute sentence B, what is sentence B doing? Well, it's returning a promise. Now, what do we have to do to promises once we get them? we have to call them using the then method. So now what I can actually do once I return this promise from sentence B is actually chain. I could chain promises by just calling then. So now if I say then, and then I could say sentence from B, and let's just copy this. Have that there. Okay, so let's actually execute this and see what we end up with. So now if I refresh this, hey, we have, hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com. So now you can imagine what we can do now. We can call sentence C. So now all I have to do is return sentence C, execute it. This execution is going to return a promise. I can then say then again. And then obviously sentence C is going to resolve and give us back what it gets, the data. So if I hit that, say C, and now if I console.log this, say sentence.c, and now if I save this and now execute it, and I probably should not say sentence C and call sentence from C. So if I copy that, save this, and now execute it, you can see that all our promises get resolved and we get, hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com. Now let's say that instead of just console.logging, let's say this asynchronous call, sentence A, needs to execute, and I need to pass that data to sentence B because this asynchronous call needs the data from sentence A to execute. So how do I pass this data? Well, that's pretty simplistic. All I need to do is pass in data to the sentence B function. And now here I can just say data plus, add that space. And now if I was to pass this in, so I no longer need to use console.log here. And I could pass in the data to sentence B. So let's actually save this. Let's get rid of this console.log here. Actually, let's keep it and let's run it. So now if I execute it, you can see, hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com. So that's how we could pass data from one promise to another. So if I wanted to pass data from sentence B to sentence C, I can copy this, paste this here, and I could say data plus, let's have a space, and now let's get rid of this. Let's first copy this, pass it into sentence C, remove this, and now you can see we only need one console.log. So now if I save this and now head over to Chrome to run it, you can say, hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from noobcoder.com. So that's how we could pass the data from one promise to another. Now let's say that, for instance, if I head back over here, let's say not everything goes according to plan. So I'm depending on an external API, and let's say their server is down. So let's say sentence B is calling that external API. So what's going to happen? Well, they're obviously going to give me an error. So what I can do is I can say reject, and I can say some error occurred. So now we're going to talk a little bit about error handling. So now if I comment this out, and now what we need to do is actually catch that error. So I could just append this and say catch. and here is going to be the error. So now I can actually just print out the error. So now if I save this and execute it, you say, hey, some error occurred. And you realize that I do not need a dot catch after each then. So our error occurred at sentence B, and it pretty much stops this whole chain. So sentence C never gets executed. This catch block gets executed and it prints out the error. And you could do your error handling here. So I could say if error equals this something, then do this. If error equals that, then do that. So that's how you do basic error handling in JavaScript. Now let's say you're dealing with a bunch of asynchronous calls, but they don't depend on each other. So right here, sentence B depends on sentence A, and sentence C depends on sentence B. So let's say they have nothing to do with each other. How do we go about handling that? So I'm just going to comment this out. So what I can use is called promise.all. Now, .all takes in an array, and I'm just going to pass in the promises that I want to execute. So I could pass in sentence A. I'm just going to copy this. Sentence A, sentence B, and sentence C. Now what's going to happen is that all these promises are going to run in parallel to each other. So if I call then, and let's actually make this on a new line, have our callback here, and now here I'll have the data. So now if I print out the data, let's see what we end up getting. But first, what I have to do is actually remove this reject, and let's execute this when everything resolves itself. So now if I go ahead and save this, now head over to Chrome, hit refresh, you can see, hey, we have 3 functions. Alright, so that means something went wrong somewhere, and I already see another error. So actually, let's go back to our editor and let's actually fix this together. So one of the things that using promise.all is we want these asynchronous functions to run parallel to each other, so they're not dependent on each other. So let's actually remove these datas that we're passing in to each other. Okay, this is one step to solving our problem. Okay, so this looks good so far. And now promise.all takes in a promise. So why didn't this work before? Well, sentence is basically a function. We don't want a function, we want a promise. So to solve this, we just forgot to call it. And now when we call it, it's going to return a promise. And then promise.all is going to work its magic. So now if I continue this, and now if I save this, and now let's execute it, and this should work. And then hey, when we got the values is an array, and then it gives us, hey, what's up guys, it's Pedro here from noobcoder.com. So now let's talk about error handling within promise.all. So if I go back to my editor, and let's say I could just say catch. Now this is exactly how we would handle it, like so up here, that we did up here. So now if I was just to catch this, now we have our callback, pass in our error, and now if I say console.log error, and let's say that sentence B once again fails. So now if I save this, head over to Chrome, and now execute it, you can see that some error has occurred. Now, promise.all is pretty much all or nothing. So if sentence B throws an error, the catch block is going to execute. If sentence C throws an error, catch block is going to execute, etc. So either they all resolve successfully, or one of them throws an error and then you're ending up in the catch block. And last but not least, let's try one more method of the promise. So instead of saying promise.all, I could say promise.race. And let's go back up here, and instead of rejecting, we are going to resolve. So now if I save this and head over to Chrome to execute, you can see, hey, what's up guys, gets printed out when we use our then method if you were to see it up here. So what's happening here? Well, all three of these promises are going to execute asynchronously. So what ends up happening is whatever loads first gets printed out in our data. So if sentence A wins, then sentence A gets printed out. If sentence B wins, sentence B gets printed out. And if sentence C wins, sentence C gets printed out. And likewise, let's actually give an example with the catch block. So I'm pretty sure that sentence A is going to resolve before sentence B and C. So what I can do is we can copy this reject here, call it in sentence A. Let's comment out the resolve, save it, and now if I head over to Chrome, execute it, you can see that some error has occurred. So if a sentence wins the race, but it gets to an error as opposed to resolving, you're going to execute the catch block. So that's pretty much the basics of using promises within JavaScript ES6.